So I want to speak about uncluttering our lives. And to me, what that means is ridding ourselves of thoughts and feelings that are obstacles to our living the kind of life that we would like to live. So what we need to do is put our attention on what really matters to us and not necessarily what's showing up in the moment. We need to keep what's important really at the top of our thinking, and we need to take time to be rather necessarily than to be doing. And so I saw this story, and I think I've told it here before, about two friends that are walking down the street of like New York City, a really big city, at lunchtime. And there's, all kinds of noise with people milling around and traffic milling around, and one of them turns to the other and he says, "Wait a minute, I hear a cricket." And his friend said, "There is no way on this busy street now that you can hear a cricket." And he said, "Yeah, I do." He said, "Come on, follow me." And he crosses the street and goes up to a building where they have one of those large cement planters, and he lifts up a leaf and there's a cricket. And his friend says, "Oh my God, you must have fabulous hearing." And he says, "No, my hearing's not really any better than yours." And just as he says that, somebody drops a bunch of change on the ground, and everybody in the vicinity stops and looks around. And the lesson in that story is that we hear what we're listening for. And the point of uncluttering our mind is to begin listening to what serves us and what adds to our spiritual growth, and to release what doesn't serve us anymore. And so I read a blog this week by a lady named Gail Brenner, and she defines the goal of uncluttering as to release, kind of what I just said, to release what's non-essential. And she says, and we keep what's needed. And the choice is where do you put your attention? And I just, in a kind of a lighthearted way, I thought about this morning. Wayne Dyer, this is what Wayne Dyer, the late Wayne Dyer, had on his voicemail, speaking about keeping your attention on what's important. "Hi, this is Wayne Dyer, and I want to feel good. If your message is designed to do anything other than that, you've reached the wrong number." So that's his way of focusing on to him what was important. The other thing I read, that when he would get, all of us are going to get thoughts that aren't important, that we'd rather not have. And when that would happen to him, that he'd have something negative come in or a thought he didn't want, what he would do is go, "Next." He dismissed that first thought just by going next. So Gail, this lady who's had the blog, she said, here's some questions that might help you in deciding what's important and what's not. Do I need this? Is it essential or necessary? Am I attached to it? Can I let it go? And she said letting go means moving your attention from a non-essential thought or feeling to one that you desire. And she gave an example in her life where she carried a lot of resentment around for years about her parents. And then one day, she said, she realized, who's the one getting hurt by my carrying all of this resentment? It's me. And she said in that instant, she dropped the resentment. And she said, and coincidentally, my relationship with my parents got a lot better. And when I read that, I had almost the same experience that I'll share with you. And this was happened after my mother, years after my mother had made her transition. And I was in a counseling, so I was the counselee. I was in a counseling session with a friend of mine who's a practitioner. And I don't remember why, but we started to talk about my mother. And I had a list of grievances because we didn't get along very well at all. In fact, for the last years of her life, she wouldn't talk to me. And when I got all done reciting my list of grievances, I turned to this practitioner who was also a good friend. And I said, so you see, haven't I always told you what a bitch she is? And my friend said, that isn't what I see. And I said, what do you see? And she said, I see a woman who is scared. And as soon as she said that, it totally shifted my consciousness. And I could let go of so much stuff because I was able to be, doesn't happen, at least it doesn't happen to me many times in my life, when I get an aha like that, that totally shifts my consciousness and able to release a lot of negative feelings. Doesn't make what she did better, but at least it makes it in some ways understandable and livable. So, you know, the question that all of us could ask ourselves, is there anything right now that's cluttering your mind, our mind, and is it worth it? So I have a book at home, we have a book at home, written by the late head of the Western Sufis, and he's got a really long name, so I don't want to try to chop it up. And just as an aside, I've talked about this before, but not in a long time. Becky and I were at a conference where his son, after he passed away, the guy who I'm going to talk to you about, his son was one of the speakers. And at the end of his talk, they set up 2 chairs, and anybody that wanted could come up and have an audience with him. And so we waited in line. And it was after, he is the most spiritual person I have ever been in the presence of in my life. And Becky, I know, feels the same way next to me. But I knew it's worth more than that. But we noticed everybody that sat in the empty chair started to cry. And the guy before us just totally went hysterical, sobbing. And the guy was a young guy, it's like 30-ish. The new head of the Western Sufis was in his 30s. And he stayed with him for quite a while and held him. And then it was our turn, and the same thing happened with us. It was just such an amazing experience to be with somebody who was so spiritually grounded, and the effect that one person had on hundreds of people who were listening to his talk. And so now his dad, who's long gone, wrote a book that we have, and he said that his dad had the expression, loosen the ties. You need to loosen the ties. And he said he didn't want to completely cut him, but he would say loosen them. And he said, so let me give you an example of what he meant. And the example is the story of the Gideon knot. And, you know, it's a fable that there was this city where there was a big knot, and the story behind it was whoever could come loosen that knot would run the world. And so the story is that Alexander the Great came to do it, and he tried and he tried and he tried, and he got really angry and he got impatient and frustrated. He couldn't do it, so he finally took out his sword and he cut the knot. And the legend is, because he did that, he would never be able to lead the whole world. And the Sufi says the message behind that is that the only way to loosen the ties that bind is by finding freedom within. By finding freedom within. And he said freedom doesn't come from circumstances, but from our conditional thoughts and emotions. That's not where it comes either. It comes from who we are and reaching down and knowing who we are and letting go of anything that's not essential. You know, the truth is that no one but you can set you free, and no one but you can put you in bondage. Only we can do that to ourselves. And Michael Beckwith says most of us don't make choices from a really consciousness of freedom. We Instead, our choices come from our ego, and they come from our psychological mind, our emotional mind. They come from our parents, from our religious, and from our social conditioning. And he said none of those are really okay for our spiritual growth. And that when we're willing to do the work, we can claim our own identity and we'll break the chains that bind us. And he said it's like a door that's opening to infinite possibilities, that through our thought we can invite into our life, physical healing, prosperity, loving relationships, creativity, and spiritual growth. We can do all of that when we do the work to clean up, so to speak, to unclutter our mind. And Eckhart Tolle looks at it and talks about it in a little bit different way, but he makes the same points. He said, our ego equates having with being. So on some level, what we say is, I have, therefore I am. And the more I have, the more I am. And it's true. I mean, I know I've gone through stages where I don't do it anymore too much, but where I've looked at somebody else and said, boy, I'd like to, was envious of somebody else, or thought, boy, I've got more than that guy. And he says the ego's self-worth is bound up. It's bound up in the worth you have in others' eyes. Think about that. That the ego's self-worth is bound up in the worth you have in others' eyes. And the ego says, I don't have enough, when what it really means is, I'm not enough. And he tells a fable about a king who is torn between happiness and sadness or anger. And when things happen in his life, he's really quick to react, and sometimes in lots of anger. So he calls in one of the wise men in his kingdom, and he says to him, can you help me? Can you help me find some kind of balance in my life between happiness and sadness, and between security and wisdom? And his wise man says, I can help you, but it's going to be difficult for you. And the king says, I'm willing to do it. So he leaves, the wise man does, and he comes back in a couple of weeks, and he's got a beautiful jeweled case that he hands to the king. And the king opens it, and there's a ring inside. And inscribed in the ring is, this too shall pass. This too shall pass. And the king says to him, how is this going to help me? And the wise man says, wear this ring, and when something happens in your life, before you declare it good or bad, rub the ring and remember, this too shall pass, and you'll be at peace. What it will teach you is, it makes you aware of the fleetingness of every situation that comes in our life. And so when you can detach yourself from that situation, you gain a higher vantage point from which to view the events, in your life. And it's so easy to lose our identity in today's world, the outside pressures. You just have to pick up a newspaper and you can see all kinds of violence, all kinds of selfishness, dishonesty, greed. And then on top of that, society puts on us, and so many of us have agreed to do it, to be so busy and to have so many responsibilities and, busy all the time. And the Sufi who I talked about before said, if that's what your life is like, if that's what it's like, at some point, because we're living on the surface, we might ask, is that all there is? Is that all there is? And what's this all about? And he said, that's why so many people are looking today to find more spiritual depth in their life, because we live such empty lives, so many of us. So I've talked about Wayne Muller a lot. He's one of my favorite authors, and when I headed up at Sillamore one year, he was the main speaker. And he says there's one of the choices that comes into our life. God, there's a fly up here. Over and over and over again, this choice is, what is the next right thing to do? What is the next right thing to do? And where shall I place my time and attention? It's kind of a subset of that. Where shall I place my time and attention? And he said, the choices that most of us make every day are rarely bold and weighty. We're not making life-altering decisions most of the time. He said they're usually small, they're humble, and they're tender. And he said they're difficult because we want to be sure that we're doing the right thing. And he said a life made up of these moments can become an elegant and beautiful journey, of deep contentment and sufficiency. And he said, our choices are our sacraments. They're sacraments because they have great power in our lives. And he said they can change and shape the destiny of more people than we will ever know. And it reminded me of it when I read that about shaping the destiny of more people than we'll ever know. At one point, when Becky and I lived in Southern California, we went to a church that was headed by a lady named Reverend Joy Yawn. And we got to be really good friends. And then Joy moved to Oklahoma. And something happened. I really don't remember what it was, but it was years later, and something happened to me, and I remembered that I was able to handle that situation because of something that Joy did for me in my life. So I call her like once or twice a year. So I called her up, and I said, I have to tell you something. And I really don't remember what it was, but I did then, and I told her, and I said, the only reason I was able to handle this is because of what you did. And I told her what she did. And there was this long silence when I got done. And she said, Ron, you know how much I love you, don't you? And I said, yeah. And she said, I have no idea what you're talking about. And she said, but I don't want you to feel bad, and I'm not saying it to make you feel bad. What I'm telling you is just what Wayne Muller said. When we go through our lives, we touch so many people that we don't even know, and we don't have any idea. So thank you. Thank you for telling me, and I love you. But just know, when you get to be my age, somebody might call you and tell you the same thing, and you won't have any idea of what you did. Because sometimes when we're living our life, we have no idea of the people that we love and the people we touch and the difference we make. So I want to close with this quote from a person named Gerald Max, who said, Keep risking that your heart's desire is trustworthy. There is always another deeper step that you can take toward a more complete trust. It will be this way until every act of every day is simply sacred. It may not feel like enough. Sometimes it feels like nothing, but it is sufficient because it's real. So thank you for being here. God bless you. Have a great week.